The third layer of this material is going to be yet another duplicate of this frame node and its contained node. So I'm going to select all of those and hit Shift-Control-D, move that right under the previous one, and I'm going to rename this Wrinkles. If you remember, I went over this in the reference analysis, and we'll change that color to red. And we're going to swap out the Voronoi texture here, hit Shift-S, and we're going to choose a wave texture. Now, if we look at just the wave texture by itself, let's turn off our vector curves. So it's just stripes in 3D space around our object. But then once we introduce the noise texture, we get this really nice breakup. And what it starts to look like is sort of a flow pattern of the lava. And for the color ramp, I'm going to switch to B-spline, drag the white all the way up, and then the black, I want it to be mostly black so that our veins are much finer. And then of course we can further manipulate our noise texture. Let's say bump it up from a scale of 5 to a scale of 10 and get a more fine breakup in our wrinkle pattern. But these are things that we can of course tweak later. And we also can introduce some blur if I just start to take this mix factor away from 1 and closer to slot 1, which is that noise texture. And it'll start to blur a little bit. I think maybe 0.7. No, I think I like 0.8 a little better. All right, so now that we've got our wrinkles, we need to incorporate it into our other two layers. And I want to incorporate it right in here so that it also filters into all these other nodes. So I'm going to hold Shift and draw a line with my left click across all three of those noodles, and that's going to give me a reroute node that I can then hit Shift-S to switch to a color mix RGB node. And I accidentally pressed the wrong node. Let's try that again. It's Shift-S, color mix RGB. And let's move everything else a little further to the right. Give us some additional room. Okay, this is going to be an overlay, and it will be the mixture for these new wrinkles that we created. Let's see what that looks like right now. So let's turn it off. You can see that we get some really nice breakup, and then with it on, we get further breakup that starts to emulate the wrinkle patterns. You know, if we go back to our reference, we're talking about these shapes in here that are wrinkles that form from the viscous liquid magma that eventually cools into solid rock, and along the way, it wrinkles just like, you know, caramel would wrinkle if you poured it into a bowl. So that's the kind of effect that we're mimicking here with this broken up waves texture. And there's one other thing that I want to add to the wave texture, and it's simply a means to better tie in one of our previous layers, or actually the two previous layers. So we can take this combination and actually plug it into our vector curve manipulation. And it will kind of bridge a gap between these, because there's no relation right now between this third layer and the first two. But if I can incorporate this mixture, the idea is that the wave texture will sort of respect what's defined in those other two layers. So let's try and do that. I'm going to add another mix node, but I'm going to do it after this first noise texture before we get to the blurring factor. So let's Shift-D to duplicate this mix node. And now I'm going to leave slot 1 open for this mixture of layer 1 and 2. For now, I'm going to turn off the blur so we can see the effect. And also I'm going to add some reroute nodes to make this a little more pleasing to our visual interpretation of the node network. Actually, I think I will move these nodes down. There we go, because it can be confusing once we start to break the linear pattern. The fact that this node is being plugged all the way down here, it helps to add these reroute nodes. And so let's see what this is actually doing by clicking, Shift-Control clicking on our color ramp. And it's a little bit crazy because, I didn't need to mute the noise texture here. That made it fully the blur texture, but let's crank it all the way up to 1. And then with this new mixture node that's incorporating the combination of layers 1 and 2, when we start to introduce that into the noise texture, this is no influence. And then once I start bringing it down, what you'll start to notice is that our black areas of the mask, in other words, the cooling part of our lava, that's making our wrinkles bigger. And then in the molten lava portions, the white areas, it's making the wrinkles finer. And if we add more influence, this should become increasingly clear. So at this point, everywhere in this texture that is white, try and keep a visual snapshot of that in your head. Everywhere that's white, our wrinkles are going to be really fine. And you can see that here very clearly. And in the dark areas, the wrinkles are much bigger. And so the point of this is to make these waves look like they're respecting that original mixture. And so let's reintroduce that blur factor again. Let's go to 0.8. And now let's look at our overlay and turn it off and then on, off and then on. And yeah, we start to get some pretty interesting wavy wrinkles happening. And so, of course, we leave open the option to further address what size our wave texture needs to be. If we want finer wrinkles in general, we just turn that up. I think I liked it at 7. We also have the detail option like we have in noise, so we can increase that. Let's see if I can zoom in to see exactly what that does. Let's make the detail 10. And yeah, it breaks up the edge a little bit more. What about distortion? What if we turn that to 1? Doesn't seem to be doing much. What about 10? Okay, as I scroll it, you can see that it is doing something. It seems to just be shifting all the wrinkles around. So that's not really maybe that useful. But this wave texture becomes a key point of manipulation in the whole node network. And so let's see what the overall material looks like now. In the broader context, it's definitely starting to look like a mixture of our reference images. We've got some nice islands of cooled lava with this wrinkle pattern that's surrounding the islands. And then where it's the hottest, the molten lava, we don't see any wrinkles. And this means we're really close to being finished with this shader, but the last thing we really need to address is making our displacement map really, really nice. And that's going to be the last lesson, but right before we get there, I want to note how easy it is to change the look of our lava. For example, if we just tweak a couple scale values of the Voronoi textures here, let's go down to 5, maybe make this one 10. We have a very different but believable pattern. We can also change the ramp up here. As I drag it up, we're getting less and less pockets of molten lava. Very easy to manipulate. And we also have access to this ramp down here, which I actually think I'm going to drag up and not make the brightest areas so clamped. And also increase this back to 7. I think that pattern is kind of what I like the most. Maybe drag this flag down a little more, get some more pockets of lava to pop up. But anyway, with these key points of manipulation along the node network, it really is quite a versatile shader. And now that we've got these 3 main components, mask layer number 1, the broad distinction between hot and cool lava, mask number 2, the higher frequency breakup of the mask, and then layer number 3, the wrinkles that surround primarily the islands of cooled lava and make for a wrinkly transition to the hot lava. And in the last lesson, we're going to address getting the displacement to be exactly what we want.